Welcome to Great Question. I'm your host, Alex Fleming, spellcaster, podcaster, and game designer, and I am here with a very special guest, KG from The Movements, a good friend of mine, if I may be so bold as to say so. KG, welcome to Great Question. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm really excited to be back after almost like 3.5 years since I was on the show back in the day. We talked about our poops. It was great.
Yes, with Corey Spencer, my lovely wife. Crazy how much has happened in those few short years.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, back then I was still going by my actual name and didn't wear this silly ass mask. So things have changed a bit since then.
Yeah. Well, it seems appropriate for the change. Doesn't feel good. I gotta say, I mean, I feel like I've had a lot of personal growth, but everything else just feels like it's crumbling.
Yeah, it's a very strange experience. Like for myself as someone who was maybe a little bit too emotionally ready for shit to go to hell. And that's like a very common thing for like a lot of folks who come from, histories of PTSD or like trauma and shit like that. When everything goes to hell, we tend to be the ones who are like, okay, this sucks, but I'm doing oddly well. It's a very strange feeling, and it's not good, but yeah, I'll take it, I guess.
Why is everyone else on my level right now?
What? Why do you sound like me? This isn't good. I'm crazy. I'm the one who has the the unpopular opinion, and now all of a sudden I'm becoming popular. Ugh.
Yeah,
this can't be good.
I feel like there's this weird fusion too in this particular current moment where we are all seeing the political collapse, but also the emotional collapse of like how those two things have been intertwined. I don't know if that's making a lot of sense, because I just when we were talking, the kind of downfall, or maybe the sort of Cassandra predictions that I heard from you before were more. So Corey was joking with me around the time that we did that podcast episode, and she was like, "Do you think there's going to be an America in 10 years?" And I was like, "Of course." And now we are revising that bet. I mean, we just don't know.
Are you allowed to revise the bet? Like,
it's a friendly
3
bet.
years into it?
It was a friendly. I mean, no, she definitely will get to say that she was right forever.
Oh, absolutely. No, what's nuts is I remember like literally right before the George Floyd uprising started. This is maybe the Friday before, so 4 days. I was at a goddamn Shabbat dinner having a virtual. It's 2020, a virtual Shabbat dinner, and having a conversation where I was trying to explain, it sounds crazy, but this country is actually a lot closer to a civil war than a lot of people realize. And also it is not fringe people. Well, it's not solely fringe people who think this. And was citing folks like Robert Evans, who I think is probably on a lot of people's radars nowadays. He's a Portland-based journalist. He has the Behind the Bastards podcast and It Could Happen Here podcast.
I listened. Yeah. I listened to It Could Happen Here. It was really interesting.
Really interesting. Possibly kind of bed-shittingly terrifying at times.
I mean, my takeaway from it was I am in a very defensible city right now, being in the Los Angeles area.
Defensible in what way?
I just remember. Yeah, we have a lot of hills to retreat into. It's a large amount of area, but a lot of places that people could potentially go into the woodwork. So it's very difficult. I mean, I think I believe Robert Evans compared it to Afghanistan.
Yeah, he did a lot of really insightful comparisons to very specific places in the United States and abroad, and those places that he's been to, and where he's interviewed people who've actually fought in there. But yeah, I was explaining this, and I felt people were politely listening and asking the devil's advocate question sort of things, and then literally 4 or 5 days later, all the shit that we were talking about, or that Robert Evans was saying was how this thing could play out, started happening. And thankfully things didn't go as badly as I was worried they were going to be at the time. Those first couple of days, it was both this is incredible, as far as how effective these protests are, both the militant side and the getting your ass beat by the cops for doing nothing side of things. But at the same time, it was just like this could go south so quickly. And I think obviously things are a little fricked up right now, but those first couple of days, I was thinking like, I thought we had like a couple of years. Now it's like, do we have a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, we are at a point now. I cannot help but notice that many shots have been fired.
Yeah.
We have this public social media debate, if there can be a debate about murder over Kyle Rittenhouse. We have already the. Is it DHS or these mystery federal troops who are in Portland?
There's
were they deployed
a bunch of different DHS agencies that who knew like all these random agencies had their own like really well equipped police forces.
Well, okay,
some people knew. Some people have been warning about this for a while, but most of us didn't.
I think my little moment of feeling like I was very vindicated was I can't remember how the story ended, but there were those unmarked troops potentially in DC that were disappearing protesters or whatever, and my hunch was that they were Blackwater connected, and then I heard something. This is very bad journalism. I don't know the source or anything. This isn't a journalistic show. Please don't listen to journalism.
No, certainly not. No.
But I thought I heard that was correct, and I was like, it's all you, Eric Prince. Finally, following this villain is seeming like it's paying off. Like I feel like the stories are starting to actually make sense in some way.
Well, I mean, I think it's reasonable to suspect those sorts of things, and I don't remember what turned out with the Eric Prince connection. Certainly the DHS stuff and the unmarked vehicles, people without identification, all true, all was really happening. But, it's not unusual in, colonial countries like the United States or imperial countries like the United States for things that have been practiced abroad to come back home at some point.
That was really what Robert Evans was hammering home in that podcast, from what I remember, was these were the tactics that we were using to put down uprisings in Afghanistan, and here we are and taking that right back.
Yeah, it's like so much of this has been so freaking utterly predictable, and like there's a part of me that feels a little bit vindicated. Like, okay, I feel less crazy. I'm still wearing goddamn ski mask on a astrology podcast, but other than that, I'm pretty sure I'm not crazy anymore. But on the other hand, it's sort of like, damn it, I kind of wish I had been wrong about this.
Well, that's the thing with prediction, right? I was overhearing. I used the term Cassandra earlier in this show, but I recently was overhearing someone talking about it for the first time, and like a friend was explaining the whole myth of Cassandra and how she was. I had forgotten that she was given the power of seeing the future against her will at first, and it's just is there comfort in saying "I told you so"? I don't really.
It's she could see the future, but nobody would believe her. That was like part of it, wasn't it?
But from what I overheard from a call happening off screen the other day, great journalism in this podcast. This is why you listen.
I studied the classics for a hot second. I should know this.
But it sounded like there were two stages. Like Apollo granted her like the ability to see the future, but then when she scorned him, he took away anyone's ability to believe her.
Oh, what a dick!
Yeah. No, and so. I've been thinking about Greek mythology a lot lately because I've been using my Mythic tarot deck a lot for personal like daily readings and stuff. And I got a card that represented Apollo recently, and the other myth that I had totally forgotten about was some story about how Hermes had stolen a bunch of his cattle and Apollo was pissed, but Hermes taught him the gift of music, or like gave him a lyre, and then he forgave it all. And it's like, oh man, these myths are just crazy. They're not. I mean, the moral of the story is if you write someone a song, you can do no wrong.
I'll have to write plenty of songs in the coming years, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's how the justice system is going to work in the future, right? It's going to be entirely poetry based.
The revolutionary justice system will be entirely poetry based.
That is why the future needs poets. So it's a bit of a tangent there. Let's take the opportunity for me to ask you about, so you're protecting your identity here. You are obviously putting out some pretty radical stuff. I actually just recently re-listened to your Soviet history of the Soviet
the Russian Revolution.
The Russian Revolution. Thank you. I was like, I'm not framing this correctly, but yes, the 8-part Russian Revolution. Because
we end right when the Soviet Union starts to happen.
Yeah, I think the actual revolution doesn't happen until 5 episodes in or something like that.
I think it takes about 3, episode 3. So you have to go through about 2 hours and 20 minutes before we even start the Russian Revolution.
And I appreciated the thoroughness. It also felt like I was approaching a piece of Russian literature in a lot of ways. Just with the length, it felt appropriate.
Well, thank you. It's like Russian literature. It's really long.
But like deep and moving and complex. There's a lot to dig into. Oh dear. Like this grave I've dug for myself. No.
There's occasionally jokes in there. Okay. Just so everyone knows, it's not a slog for 8 hours.
No. I appreciated a lot of the references to Stanislavski also, and the Moscow Art Theater.
I was wicked excited when I was like, I have a legitimate reason to talk about this, because my background is in theater and performance and that sort of thing, and for the last several years I've been putting so much energy into political work and like more like kind of scholarly kind of bullshit. So it was like, oh man, let's just talk about like Russian theater for a hot second. And I got to use the term Brechtian, I think, at one point. I was like, yeah.
That's always a win. So what are you working on now? What's what are you producing these days?
Yeah, so I got my 2 big projects right now. The first is the current history series I'm working on, which is the histories of the Guatemalan and Cuban revolutions, and sort of using those 2 countries and those 2 histories as sort of a context to explain the history of Latin America during the Cold War, specifically from the perspective of like, what was the Latin American left doing? What were they thinking? What were they experiencing? I think one of the fun little coincidences of history is that Che Guevara was in Guatemala during the coup in 1954, which is a bonkers story. You read the whole thing and you're like, this is basically like 2003 Iraq war stuff, but in the mid 50s, and even more bonkers in a lot of ways. But while all this is going on and the government is collapsing and the U.S. ambassador is literally like, coordinating a bunch of bombings from the embassy, while also negotiating the government to surrender and all this sort of stuff. Che Guevara's in the capital, where he had been like selling tchotchkes on the roadside, little light up Jesus statues, poorly constructed, of course. And that sort of experience of seeing the United States just go in and just destroy this democratic, popular, legitimate government, the first democratic system that Guatemala had in its history at that point. And sort of his sort of takeaway from that was, well, that's what happens when you don't like do some executions and like, retreat to the hills to go fight a guerrilla war to defend your country. And
the US right comes after for you.
Yeah, or that's what allows the U.S. to win, basically. The Guatemalan Revolution, which was really reform-minded. Revolution is accurate, but as far as like how hard and like, violent it wasn't especially. It was actually really legalistic. and pretty tame, honestly. And he sort of took the lesson from that of being like, okay, well, we're not going to do that again, as did a lot of other Latin American leftists. And he meets up with Fidel Castro in Mexico City the following year, and as they say, the rest is history. So that's my current project, is telling that story.
And what brings you to that story? Like, why is that the story you've chosen to tell next?
After spending 2.5 years of doing the goddamn Russian Revolution, which is fascinating, and I had a lot of fun doing it, but boy, I was like, I kind of want to just do something that feels a little bit more personal, a little bit more, and also like I knew the history already a little bit better.
Gotcha.
And it's not to say it's less complex, but for me, it was just like this just requires a lot less background to dive into. And also, I've actually been to some of these places. That's where my family is from, Central America. So some of the places that I had to talk about, it's like, well, I've been there. I've seen that statue or been in that city, walked in those places. So it was a desire to do something that was a little bit more personal. And it's a series that will start off feeling like history. It's the 1950s. It was a long time ago. But then by the end, you sort of see, oh, that's why we have a lot of people coming to Central America. And that's why, like, Cuba is doing really well against COVID-19, while most of Latin America is, like, completely falling apart. Even the wealthy countries like Chile, which actually has a higher death per million rate than the US, which is kind of nuts. And they're like one of the richest, wealthiest countries in Latin America. And for those of you who know your Chilean history, you better believe we're going to talk about September 11th, 1973 as well. So we'll drop by in some other countries too. So yeah, I wanted to be able to tell something personal that by the end of it, you're like, oh shit, this is actually relevant. This ain't just like a random story somebody's telling me.
Sort of that transitional period from what feels like it is old history to something that feels modern.
Yeah, I think for myself, like, I started getting interested in history in high school, which was like Bush era. First Bush term I was in high school, and the Cold War seemed so anachronistic and far away in a lot of ways.
You're talking about Bush W, right?
Bush W, yes, thank you. I'm not that old.
No, but it's just, I feel like there's been a lot of conversation, at least in my social media landscape, podcast landscape lately, of just people talking about W a lot and that time. And I mean, it's September right now. There's been a lot of things about 9/11 and the Iraq War. Yeah. But a lot about this sort of reaction to the rehabilitation of W and this idea.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, of like, no, it wasn't that better. That Paul Krugman tweet or whatever. Where
yeah.
Things were fine. I was like, what are you talking about?
It was like George W. just shouldn't stoke Islamophobia. And it's like, well, yeah, he made some comments about like, we're not going to a war against Islam. We're going to war against Islamic fundamentalism. But like in reality, he was also surveilling and harassing the shit out of Muslim Americans, and the shit that a lot of them went through, which did not get paid attention to at the time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that like I only recently learned about that were going on during those years. It was vicious. They really ruined a lot of people's lives. It's just nobody cared at the time. Yeah, for whatever reason, we can look back on those years, and I think the real difference is, obviously, I'm not going to go ahead and say that Trump has been like, a better president or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that's been a little bit easier is that because he's more honest about what he says and believes, and more, what is the Scarface line? Even I'm always telling the truth, even when I'm lying. You know where he stands. And it's sort of made things a little bit more clarifying, whereas denialism was much easier to do under, someone like George W. Bush, who would talk nice and say what he had to say, but then he would give the green light to the FBI just fucking people shit up.
Yeah, I remember reading, I remember being in my 10th grade classroom and stumbling on an article about a man who had been indefinitely detained for being a material witness to terrorism, with absolutely no charges I don't remember what happened with the story, but I just remember feeling so alone and like I was screaming and no one cared.
There was a lot of entrapment, a lot of targeting like individuals who were clearly very susceptible to suggestion, who had no way of actually accomplishing any sort of attack. And then like they'd be like, all right, this person seems susceptible, possibly in some cases, they are fitting the profile of exactly, they're doing exactly the kind of thing you would do to like recruit somebody to do terrible things, but they're the government. It was absolutely nuts, the number of people that they manipulated. And what's hilarious, I don't know if you saw this, was because so many of our terrorism laws were written with the war on terror specifically in mind, the laws that have been used, the rare times when the federal government will actually go after white supremacists, when they do it, they've had to do ridiculous things like there was recently a bust of a couple of guys where the FBI sent undercovers to pretend to be members of Hamas and like tried to like sell these guys a bunch of stuff, like,
I read about
care
this.
of Hamas.
I just saw the headline.
And, which is absolutely bonkers. And then Hamas like released a public statement condemning white supremacists and like the FBI for pretending to be them. They're like, we don't attack people outside of like Israel and Palestine, and two, we definitely are not going to be selling shit to white supremacists. That's like, we fucked up, but we don't do that. We don't do that shit.
Yeah. Shit. Yeah, when Hamas draws the line, you got to really evaluate where you are in relation to that line.
Hamas is the voice of reason in 2020.
Oh, boy. Yeah, no, that is just the climate, right? It's just everything feels... Okay, so to call back something I said at the very beginning, so there's this political collapse that it feels like we're observing, even though we're talking about Bush, we're talking about 9/11, the Patriot Act, we're talking about starting war. Like, I feel like materially, one of the big differences in the present moment is now we are in a country that would be invaded by the United States if this was like 2000. And I know that's like a meme.
No, I think right now we would be supported by the United States at this current moment.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, we have this. I mean, I don't want to talk about Trump too much, but I just I think there is something very particular about the fact that the president of the United States is very likely a narcissist in a clinical sense, and I just like the way that Q has evolved around him as a way to make sense of his own fantasy world, and the way that I just, as a person who comes from a family with narcissism in it, and sees the sort of family dynamic that plays out with this sort of intense factionalism and the constant fear and the using of people and just discarding of them like a revolving door. I keep thinking that America, I know Marianne Williamson was like funny and stuff, but the one thing I really want to give her credit for is I do feel like we need a psychic healing as a country right now. And this is what I think this spirituality stuff and all this hocus pocus stuff, it can be really helpful for, is just there's so much pain and trauma, and the normal response to trauma for many people is to go ahead and abuse others and pay it forward like that. And it's so hard to take that, and especially then now that we're all quarantined and dealing with just being in our shit, and we don't have the bread and circus of regular life to kind of distract us from these things. It's a unique psychic torment that is living right now. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting what you bring up about trauma and like a national healing and all that sort of thing. Because I think one of the things that I found fascinating doing the Russian Revolution history in particular, was the role of trauma and PTSD. And this wasn't like explicitly harped on by any of the historians I read, because I think, it's not their expertise. And the extent to which they did talk about trauma, it's sort of like kind of clumsy, because they don't really know how it works. And for that matter, I'm not a professional, so take me with a grain of salt.
Sure.
But it was like, some of the people among the Bolsheviks who were like the most brutal and ruthless were also like the dudes who spent the most years in czarist prisons and who had learned the techniques that they were using as far as like, interrogation and whatnot. They learned it from the people who they were now using it against.
Yeah.
And like, even in taking away the question of, Lenin and the Bolsheviks away from it entirely, the brutality of the Russian Revolution started way before the Bolsheviks were doing any of it, because it was really just like generations of pent-up frustration and abuse and also a lot of bad blood from like, you hung my brother, so now let's burn your estate and hang the landlord sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff just started happening spontaneously all over the country, before any sort of organized Red Terror or anything like that started. And so like one of the takeaways I took away from it was like, because I'm generally I entered that project 2.5 years of working on this project. I entered it with the sort of like classic, like, oh yeah, one party states and like, Leninism bad and, that sort of thing. And by the end of it, I sort of left and was like, you know what? They needed freaking therapists. That's what they needed. Because so much of this was like, a lot of it was based on fairly realistic understandings of what was going on at the time. I mean, Russia was being attacked by the United States, by France, by Germany, all these different countries. And this is after World War One. All these different countries blockaded the country, sent their army, sent tanks, sent weapons, sent brand new uniforms to the proto-fascist white army, for several years. And, at a certain point, like some shit's going to happen. You're going to have to get a little gangster in those situations. And so for me, I was just like, at a certain point, it's a goddamn civil war. What did you think was going to happen? But also, maybe they could have toned some of that shit down. Like one of the things that was going on at the time, and I think about this a lot because I'm like, things obviously are only at a certain simmering level of heat right now, but I do kind of worry, like, what's things going to be like 5-10 years from now if if the temperature keeps raising? How bad is this going to get? And so, like, one of the things that you had happen in the fucking Russian Revolution was like they release the prisons, and because it was like, a czarist Russia, there was a lot of people who had been in prison for a very long time. And, there's also a horrible famine and like the industrial base has been destroyed. There's no opportunities. But hey, you know what? Here, have a gun. Our cities are starving. Go get some grain from those peasants over there. And you're not going to give you any sort of other support to like deal with the fact that you just spent like 20 years in a fucking gulag and now we're giving you a gun and telling you go get grain. Like, obviously, there was going to be some bad shit that happened. So for me, I'm just like, we need therapy.
Yeah.
We really need some goddamn therapy.
And then on the other hand of that is it's so hard to get therapy. It's so expensive, and the system of insurance is so Byzantine. I mean, there's so many barriers to it.
Yeah, it's goddamn garbage. But like, I think one thing I take some sort of confidence or reassurance, I don't know what you call it, is, hindsight is a beautiful thing. There's a lot more people, a lot more acceptance of vulnerability and seeking mental and behavioral health support now than there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think those sorts of fields were not accessible to the average, Red Army soldier or peasant, who was imprisoned in a gulag
If only
sort
they
of
had
thing.
Andy from Headspace.
I don't get the reference, but I'm gonna laugh.
It's these mindfulness apps. I mean, it's
Oh, I get ads for that shit.
I'm just taking a moment because I don't know how to process this, but like, so I live in LA County, and LA County's the Department of Mental Health Services has given everyone a complimentary service. Everyone in LA County has complimentary access to a meditation app where an Australian man can or British man can tell you how to meditate, and it is a. No, there's a side of it that's just like very corporate and very weird to see it connected with like Zen Buddhism. But then also there is a part of it that's just like, absolutely, I need to meditate right now.
That's the effed up thing, is like those sorts of things are so inadequate, but also like you don't got anything else, so you take it. And like it maybe like helps center you a little bit, clear your mind for like 15 minutes. But then like 40 minutes later, you're just going to be in whatever state you were going to be, because that shit is so inadequate. It's just like, let us give people the bare minimum. We can take the edge off, but then they're still going to be fucking losing their shit all the time.
Well, that's why, that's the kind of things that are offered, not real systemic change or anything like that. And I'm not expecting that much from the LA Board of Mental Health at this point, but... I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to plug Corey's book. Since it deals with these topics, I'm Not Okay, You're Not Okay. Just came out earlier this month through Abrams, and you can buy it at a local bookstore that is an Amazon.
It just the title alone just screams I'm living in 2020.
Which is funny because she started writing it in, I think, 2018.
Well, she was forward thinking. Exactly. Remember your bet about America?
Oh God. This is where it came from. So I don't know. What do you think when you look forward though? Do you have this is a divination podcast, and I do my best to see the future through cartomancy every time. But one of the tools I always try to use is before addressing the cards, our intuition and our intellect can often give us great predictions as well. I mean, what do you see? Do you have predictions?
Well, as a historian, I'm going to be the first person to tell you that we can't predict shit. But based on like my sort of like trends and forces, yada yada. Gosh. I mean, right-wing terrorism is going to be a thing for a while. I think there's going to be waves. There's going to be ebbs and flows, but I think it's going to be with us for the immediate period before, during, and after this goddamn election, regardless of which way it goes. And I think that's the thing that's sort of like stressful and concerning. But I will say that what gives me a little bit of hope is that they are incredibly incompetent for the most part. There are some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, this has not been the far right on its A game. And fascists, one of our big advantages against them is that they tend to be cowards, and when they're not especially savvy politically, as our far right tends to be recently, they tend to overestimate their strength. They miss opportunities. They alienate themselves. That this could all not matter at all at the end of the day. They can still succeed even with all of those factors. But it is something that I think we can use to our advantage. Whatever happens in the future is these guys were really they're cowards, and they're silly, and they make really stupid choices a lot of the times. So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Okay, all right, that's a little comfort. Is there anything we can do to prepare or protect ourselves in your estimation?
Yeah, I've been telling people learn some basic first aid. Actually, on our Facebook group, we did a training a few months ago during the George Floyd uprising with a buddy of mine who's an a Navy doctor vet. Who basically did a training on using tourniquets and how to control bleeding wounds and that sort of thing. I think that's a really practical thing that people can do very easily. You can learn how to fashion a makeshift tourniquet, or you can go ahead and buy a proper one. But the important thing is like learning very basic things that don't take that long to learn and practice. That put you in a situation that, God forbid, you ever have to, deal with somebody who's losing blood out in the street or wherever. You can buy the time that makes it very likely that they'll survive. I forget what the numbers were, but he was basically like, if somebody knows what they're doing and reduces the bleed early on, the chances of somebody surviving like a gunshot wound shoots up really high.
Huh.
And it's actually it's not that hard to save somebody, provided somebody was able to buy the time and slow down bleeding. But at a certain point, if someone's bleeding out and if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, that's when people die, or otherwise end up having serious medical issues as a result of their injury. So I think it's a little bit of a downer, but like honestly, that's one. Look up that training on Movements Pod on Facebook. It's one of our videos.
Awesome.
But you can also just go up on YouTube and Google "Stop the Bleed" or "How to Stop Bleeding," tourniquets, that sort of thing. There's a lot of resources out there. A lot of them were developed because of mass shootings and stuff like that, actually. And now it's finding use in this new context, which is a little unfortunate. But I think that's one practical thing that people can do. And otherwise, I think study history and study theory. God, the American left is so adverse to studying theory. And it's like, it doesn't have to be academic, but like knowing theory means you know history. It means you know a little bit about like psychology, a little bit of everything, getting a well-rounded knowledge so you can have some sort of context for what's happening.
Do you have
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you have a recommended entry point? Because I've had this experience where I've been talking to people who've been a little bit more radicalized, especially after the unemployment extra $600 a week went away, and there was this feeling of like, oh, the government actually doesn't care, and so some of the people I was talking to, they were like, okay, yeah, no, I'm maybe ready to start flirting with radicalism, with socialism, communism, just starting to think outside of just being a liberal. Is there any media that you would recommend for someone who, for example, maybe comes from a small town and just hasn't been exposed to a lot of stuff that isn't like American anti-communist propaganda, like 80s era stuff?
I think it's tough because like there's some stuff out there that's super dry and academic. And like some people can start off just by reading Marxist texts and like be fine.
That's what I recommend.
If you don't, there's so many references that they make that it's like, I don't know what you're condemning this random journal from Sweden in 1908. I don't know what you're talking about. But what I would recommend is there are some good like podcasts and like YouTubers who have done these really helpful resources. So like basic Marxist economics, Richard Wolff is pretty great. He's an economics professor who's also just like a delight and a fun guy to listen to.
Cool.
Philosophy Tube does some decent Marxist stuff. But also it's important to find variety of different things, because even then they're not always going to be exactly aligning on things. So like someone I've been really into recently on YouTube, Black Redguard, who's a Maoist, and I'm not a Maoist personally, but Black Redguard has done a really good job, I think, of sort of like putting into context why a lot of Maoist ideas in theoretical practices actually make a lot of sense. And for myself, like being somebody from family from the third world, it's like there's a lot of Maoists in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There's a reason why Mao resonates with a lot of people of color, particularly abroad, and particularly with a lot of anti-colonial struggles and movements, that sort of thing. So I'd say look for resources like that. Don't rely on just one, one sort of like ideology or any bullcrap like that. Learn a little bit from everybody. And then at a certain point, you'll just start to have like a better instinct for understanding the shit that doesn't seem to make sense makes complete fucking sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like, at least personally, I've been doing a lot of listening more than reading in this quarantine, but I feel like everything's coming into focus in a very scary way, but it's very satisfying also, though, just to feel like, oh no, I do see that in fact there are traces of cause and effect that just cover the globe, and these things aren't totally random, and there's a reason that these circumstances, that these conditions are the way that they are.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche at this point, but it's like there's a big difference between looking at the world and saying the system is broken and looking at it and saying this is actually how it's supposed to be working. Whatever version of it we thought we had, the extent to which it was working, it was a historical anomaly. After World War II, everybody else's economy was destroyed. We had a political reason for wanting to discourage people from embracing communism abroad. And so, like, yeah, social welfare and social democratic or democratic socialist, whatever you want to call it, policy became a thing for like one generation. But then by the 70s, it started going away. So, like, yeah, whatever nice version of the American system or of capitalism that we may have somewhat experienced, if you're lucky, at some point, historical anomaly, and that shit ain't happening again.
And it's also harder to say there's no empire here. What are you talking about? It's just it feels so much more naked every day in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, no, we're looking, like you said, we're looking more and more like a country that the U.S. either overthrows or enthusiastically supports, depending.
Well, we're running low on time, so let's change gears a little bit. Let's try and we were talking about looking forward, and it got a little grim. Let's try a different methodology for our future vision. Let's try cartomancy. So, do you have a question for the cards here today?
Yeah.
KG.
So it's funny because we're talking all this shit about like revolution and then like down with the U.S. and shit like that, but then I'm like, yeah, but like, where's my direction in life going?
Yeah.
Like this very like milquetoast sort of question.
Yeah, but all politics is local, right?
Yeah, and like the last time I was on the show, we did a similar thing with. I was just starting the podcast, and I was like, what's going to come of this? Am I doomed to just repeat changing my life gears every 5 years? And that was actually a really great sort of a way to sort of reflect on things last time. So I say I'm going to do it again. And I guess I want to ask is the question is this going anywhere? Like my work as a historian, as a podcaster, I've been doing a lot more working on my learning about sound and audio engineering to start doing more voiceover stuff, not under this name or with this mask, let me assure you. But
you mentioned something about an audiobook project when we were talking earlier.
Yeah. Well, that's my own project, but I am sort of doing it as practice for looking for work as a narrator. I'm unemployed now thanks to COVID-19, and
thanks COVID.
Yeah, I mean, this is like one of those weird things where like I hated the job I had before, but it was the job I had that kept me from starving and gave me good health insurance. And I have a lot of health issues, so that was really important for me.
Yeah.
So now that I've lost the job, in some ways I feel liberated, but in other ways it's like I need money because the savings and unemployment is not going to be here forever. So I decided I've been talking about wanting to go, on my own and support myself using voiceover skills, and maybe making a little bit more money doing the podcast, doing history stuff. And so I guess my sort of question is this going to work? Like, or like, am I going to be able to sustain myself doing what I'm genuinely interested in, producing political education, free, accessible political education, and like reading audiobooks or something like that? Like, can I pull this off?
Great question. Now, I should have asked you before. When we were talking at the very beginning of the show, when I was setting up, I was showing you some of the different tarot decks we've got. I've got Goddess Guidance cards. I've got the classic Rider-Waite-Smith. I've got the Mythic deck, which is my newest deck, and I've got the Dog Tarot. What deck did you want to use to ask this question?
Dog Tarot,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, good. After all this, this dark conversation about doom and gloom.
I'm about to be the guy on the subway right now for just a second. Don't mind me.
I knew this might happen. It was a conversation.
Oh, I had to wet my whistle. The Zapatista mask is not conducive for dry mouth.
I did hear a little fun handling noise from the can, though. I want to save that for my Foley archive.
Oh yeah, like I can do all kinds of sound effects for you here.
Oh, nice. So I want to try something new, and I want to give you up to 3 cards if you're interested in a 3-card reading, because this is the Dog Tarot deck. It's a little concise. I'm shuffling the cards right now in my hands, and I just recorded an episode with a friend of the pod, Sam Z, who I believe you know, and he was showing me this technique from Alejandro Jodorowsky that I wanted to try. That
Spanish film director? The really weird one?
Yeah.
Word.
He has his own tarot deck, which is what I learned. You can listen to that episode. That's last week's episode.
That makes so much sense. That just makes so much sense.
Right? Doesn't it?
Those are weird fucking movies.
Oh, yeah. No, love The Holy Mountain. Just watched the documentary about Dune that never happened.
I haven't seen that one.
It's a great documentary. I highly recommend the doc. It's so interesting. I mean, it would have been Star Wars before Star Wars if it actually happened also. Like
that's a alternate universe I want to peek into.
The only reason that it didn't happen is because they didn't trust Jodorowsky, because they were like, this guy is too uncontrollable.
I mean, they weren't wrong.
They weren't wrong. But like, yeah. So I definitely recommend this doc. But anyway, so give me 3 numbers between 1 and 77.
All right. 36,
okay.
44, 71.
Great. And then I'm going to deal it out. That's how this works. 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25.
I hope everybody enjoys watching my glasses fog up periodically.
I know. I'll put some music over this. I also realized I think this deck is smaller than other decks because I just counted through it really quickly. Okay, so first card, doing my best to improvise under, as much as I want to plan things, I also want this show very much to be an experiment in practice. Like I'm trying to demonstrate and model my tarot practice through it, and sometimes it's not always the most polished for being a show, but bear with me during these moments. Okay, 44 is number 2. Okay. And 71. Okay. So I did a randomization process. I don't even know exactly how it worked because that's how random it was. But I used those numbers. They definitely informed the randomization process. So let's take a look. I need a second camera is what I'm realizing. I need like a card cam.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, for future shows. Or where's my phone isn't within arm's reach. I was thinking of taking a picture. Anyway, let's not take away tension. Let's add tension. I'm a drum roll, please. I'm going to draw the first card. The first card in the pass position.
This is my drum roll. I'm clapping.
It's a good clap roll. The first card in the pass position is the Shelter. Ooh, one of the major arcana. So you can see there's a dog. I don't know what the.
That's a good boy.
Yeah. What do you want to describe the card for anyone who's listening?
It looks like you got this cute little pupper. I'm bad at dog breeds, but he's a good one. And it looks like he's dreaming, and in his like dream clouds, there's like a pink dog house, and it's got like some flowers and some leaves and stuff. And I don't know, he looks like he's wagging his tail. It looks like a good dream.
Yeah.
But he's also awake, so it must be a daydream.
Oh, that's an interesting observation. Okay. So the Shelter, according to the book, symbolizes hope. It reminds us that even the worst situations can turn out for the best. But this is in the past position also.
All right.
So the message for humans who draw the Shelter is, if you're feeling lost or blue, examine your worldviews, challenge the notions that fuel negativity. You have the power to invoke confidence and choose a path that is life-affirming. I mean, we're coming from a position of choosing control over your life, but at the cost of risk. It's in the past position, but it seems like it's coming from a place that it's definitely making you a happy creature. In the present position, we have the 3 of leashes.
3 of leashes.
Yeah.
All right. So this one, we got this nice little night sky, some stars on the background, possibly a little bit of snowfall. Looks like there's no leaves on these trees, and in the sky there's, would you guess there's 3 leashes forming like kind of a triangular circle-y kind of dealio.
So the leashes represent limitation, possessiveness, control, manipulation, and the folly of headstrong behavior, and they're associated with the restrictions of winter. So good eye noticing the season there. Yeah, it's a clear sky, but the tree's a little dead. 3s, though, I'm not reading from the book here, but just in my own knowledge of tarot and numerology, 3s always represent a stage of initial completion. The journey is not finished, but there is something to show for it, always. So, I see the beginnings. That you've planted the seeds here of your dream of the Shelter, of being able to construct your own shelter on your own terms.
Yeah.
Let me see what else the book says about the 3. Suggests you're being focused, fair, and effective in your approach to balancing your relationship with your inner dog. The card also serves as affirmation that equilibrium is best achieved through praise and reward rather than manipulation and fear. But though you probably already know this.
Of myself?
I think, if you are becoming your own employer, right? And your fear is your ability to take care of yourself. The other thing to keep in mind is how you treat yourself. And whether or not you're able to put yourself in a position where you can treat yourself better than when an external force was the one providing your shelter. And then here in the last position in the future, we have the moon.
All right. So, oh man, this is beautiful. So there's a big old bright full moon up in the skies, the night skies. There's some constellations. I don't recognize the constellations. I think one of them looks like a box. I'm not good at stars. There's some sort of building in the background, like a castle kind of thing, and green grass and a path leading from the castle to myself, the viewer. And then there's a dog right up in front, jumping up at the moon with its tail wagging, being a cute little pupper. It looks like.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've encountered this card before, but it is definitely one of the ones that I'm familiar with from the Major Arcana. I've seen it a lot. I mean, the moon, the sort of TLDR version that I've always heard has been that the moon has phases, it waxes and wanes, it is not necessarily reliable. However, let's take a look at what the book for this deck says about it. The moon is the card of joy and expansiveness. It speaks to your dog's deepest heart. And so this is the other side of it, though, is that, yeah, it definitely kind of connects to asserting a letting out of a primal energy of like I've seen other art with other creatures howling, obviously at the moon. So let's see what this text says. Everyone needs something to howl at. The moon, like the kibble card, reminds us that once upon a time in genetic history, dogs were wolves. That's easy to forget, especially if your dog is a precious Bichon Frise or a tiny teacup Maltese with a serious but darling underbite.
Oh man, this makes me wish I knew more about dogs. I'm sure there's got to be like a cat deck somewhere, some way.
There's got to be,
because I feel like that one I would really be able to relate to.
It's funny because there is a card in this deck that is the cat.
Oh,
yeah. But so here, let me skip down to the interpretive meaning of the card. The message for humans who draw the moon is it's never too late to kick up your paws to contact the wonderful wildness in your own nature. So the pessimist in me notices the distinct lack of anything that has to do with like finance or business outside of the past card. I'm trying to think about. So they have leashes, bowls, biscuits, and bones in this deck, and they go to wands, swords, cups, and pentacles. And I'm trying to remember what the exact analogy is. Bowls are summer and fire, so those are wands. Leashes, no, bowls have got to be cups. That doesn't make any sense. The bowl is a cup. Biscuits are hope and.
That's a controversial statement.
What statement?
Bowls are cups.
Aren't bowls just cups for dogs?
Have you ever tried to drink orange juice out of a bowl?
Maybe.
I guess we've all done shit like that.
Listen, it's quarantine, and sometimes there are no clean cups.
You never ripped a shot out of a ladle?
No, I don't think I've done that, actually. Man, I feel like I should know this 1-to-1. There's 4 suits for things. Bones felt like they were pentacles to me. Maybe leashes are air? Yeah, that would make leashes swords, which actually kind of makes sense because swords usually have a destructive and a cutting edge, though they also can create and divide what was 1 into 2 and so forth. So you have this, and those are also connected with swords and leashes in this, connected with the intellect, with the mind. So you have this project of the mind. I think the message I'm definitely getting, seeing shelter, leashes, the moon, is this project will 100% be spiritually nourishing and will allow you to unleash a part of you. Maybe that you will be more complete through it. I mean, there is in the moon. There is this city in the distance. Like it's not without some stability. Um, but I don't know. It's the moon is the sort of thing that comes and goes. So you have to you have to follow it closely.
Yeah. This is all very interesting. I think particularly because I think the last time we did this, I think there was a lot more of an emphasis on like, you know, more like the specificities of like material well-being and like, am I just gonna like keep changing my mind about what I want to do and that sort of thing. Um, and this time it feels like a little bit more about my spirituality, as you mentioned. And I will say, like, one thing that has been, again, it's also weird because the world is burning around us, but like in my own day to day life, I have so much less daily stress. I have the world at large is very stressful, and like, there's certain things that I am preparing for or like thinking about, anticipating that might come into the future that are larger than myself. But when it comes to the things that are like closer to my immediate day to day life, things do seem like they're a little bit more. I don't know. I feel like I'm living a lie less nowadays. At the very least.
I was just gonna say with all that talk about the moon connecting to in the book, it's all about like all these dogs come from wolves and not that, but it feels like accessing a core self.
Yeah.
And the material wealth of the world may ebb and flow, but at least you will be. It looks like it's really this is a strengthening. The other thing that's kind of interesting here, I'm looking at the shelter and the moon in these cards, and they're pretty similar dogs. I mean, there's a consistency.
Yes. After I saw that, I assumed they were all going to be the same dog.
No, they're definitely different dogs throughout the deck. So that's
Okay.
that's something of significance. I would definitely read into it. So you're not. The other thing that's interesting is you're dreaming of the shelter in the past, and the shelter does not appear, but it also in the moon it doesn't look like the dog needs the shelter. The dog has accessed a way of living, at least in this moment, in which the dog is more in tune with its surroundings, and in fact has put the city a little bit further behind it.
He seems more interested in the moon than the fucking city.
No, I mean definitely the phrase moonshot comes to mind. The other thing you mentioned the constellations in here, and I am not an astrologer. I don't really know that much about it. I definitely want to get some guests on here to talk about astrology because it always connects to this stuff, but I just don't have that knowledge. But I'm pretty sure I see I think Cancer, the crab, and I think there's a dipper in the upper right hand corner.
Okay, I thought that might have been a dipper. I couldn't see the arm part of it, but
yeah, there's like I don't really know what this is.
it's funny. It's really funny doing this, from the internet, like across two different sides of the country, because I have to. Well, I guess I could like zoom in, get a closer look at that fucker.
Yeah, no, it's difficult, but hey, now I've got a video component. It's a different show. It's evolving. That being said, I have to keep saying this just because I never really promoted my YouTube very much before in the past. But if you do want to see, if you're listening and you're like, I wish I could see this amazing mask. I wish I could see these cards. Please head on over to YouTube and subscribe. So the short answer, your question, is this going to work? I mean, the answer I think is a yes, but I ask you to look more deeply at what it means for it to work.
Yeah,
because that may be different than what you initially dreamed up in the shelter.
It's frustrating because like I don't even need that much money to do okay and get by, but like I have to buy if I'm going to be self-employed and shit. Health insurance is fucking expensive.
I know,
as all hell. And that's the thing. It's like I could be in a situation where I'm making okay money on paper, but when becoming self-employed, all these new considerations come into it. New types of expenses I never would have considered. health insurance being the big one. That
yeah.
one right there.
No, that
I have a decent like equipment set up right now, but it's like there's continued investment and all that, like that sort of stuff. So I think part of the thing is like I still got to figure out what exactly it would look like to make it work.
But in terms of where you are mentally with what you want to do, I mean, it seems like you have a plan and you should execute it. That's what the cards are telling me. Like, in terms of the work, the how you build your shelter, how that fits into things, that's still an open question. But in terms of whether or not you can harness the potential of your idea and turn it into something, I think that's definitely a yes. How that all fits together, we'll have to ask another question.
Well, we better get some goddamn universal health care in this country pretty soon.
Maybe that
would solve a lot of problems,
right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. No, this is a big issue for me. Corey and I both have health issues. Her a lot more than me, and now that we're both unemployed. Oh yeah, no. Let me tell you. I mean, hopefully, I'm not making any money off this podcast, but it is a huge expense, and then the quality of care goes down. It's just ridiculous. It's like
you pay more for less care. It's great.
Well, on that wonderful note, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much, KG, for being here.
Can I tell folks about where to find the show?
Please.
I don't think we talked about that. Yeah. So the Movement's a podcast history of the masses. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify now. We're on Spotify.
Nice.
And also Facebook and Twitter at Movements Pod. We have additional content on there, including trainings on police abolition and the Stopping the Bleed tourniquet trainings, things like that. So it's a mixture of historical stuff, but also more like practical history stuff. And also pretty soon I will be releasing an audiobook, The Weapon of Theory by Amilcar Cabral, who is a Cape Verdean revolutionary who was founded the PAIGC, which liberated a bunch of colonies from the Portuguese Empire, including Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and also was really influential in also helping to liberate Angola as well. So I'm doing an audiobook of his speech, The Weapon of Theory, and hopefully we'll be producing more of those in the future.
Awesome. I will definitely keep my ear to the ground for all that. We'll have links in the show notes to Movements Pod. Thanks again for being here, KG. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For more episodes of Great Question or more information about my upcoming game, Ultimate Dungeon Cleaner, go to www.sodabags.com.